I want you to picture something with me. Picture coming home after a long, ordinary day. You drop your keys on the counter, kick off your shoes, and your husband is sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He doesn't look up, he doesn't say hello. There's this heavy, suffocating silence sitting between you that you can't quite explain, and when he finally does look at you, it's like he's looking at a stranger. That was my life for almost 4 months before I understood what was actually happening to me. My name is Carla. I've been married to my husband Daniel for 6 years. We met through mutual friends, dated for 2 years, got engaged, had the kind of wedding that makes people cry at the reception. The real kind of tears, not the polite kind. We bought a house in the suburbs of our city, we talked about starting a family, we had what I truly believed was a rock-solid partnership. We weren't perfect, no marriage is. But we were honest with each other, we communicated, we worked through things. That was the foundation I thought we had built. And then slowly, without warning, that foundation started cracking. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about this kind of manipulation, it never does. If it had been sudden, if Daniel had woken up one day and said, "I think you're cheating on me," I would have known immediately that something was wrong. I would have pushed back. I would have asked questions. But it wasn't like that at all. It started small. So small I almost missed it. The first thing I noticed was that Daniel stopped sharing things with me. Not in a dramatic way, he didn't suddenly go silent or refuse to talk. It was subtler than that. He used to come home from work and tell me about his day, funny things that happened, frustrating meetings, little moments. And then, one week, he just stopped. When I asked him how his day was, he'd say fine and change the subject. When I tried to start conversations, they'd die out quickly. He was physically present but emotionally somewhere else entirely. I assumed he was stressed. He'd been dealing with pressure at work, his company had been going through some restructuring, and I knew it was weighing on him. I gave him space. I tried to be patient. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd come around, that we'd get back to normal. But the weeks passed and it didn't get better. It got worse. He started coming home late from work more often. Not every night, just enough to notice. When I asked about it, he'd say he had things to wrap up or a meeting ran long. Again, reasonable explanations. The kind of thing that's easy to believe because there's nothing obviously wrong with it. But I noticed that when he came home late, there was this energy about him. Not guilt exactly. More like guardedness. Like he was being careful about something. I started to feel this low-grade anxiety that I couldn't shake. Not full-blown alarm, just this persistent uncomfortable feeling in my chest that something was off. I mentioned it to my closest friend Renata, and she said what most people say in that situation: have you just talked to him about it? Just ask him directly. So I did. I sat Daniel down one evening and I told him that I'd been feeling disconnected from him, that something felt different and that I wanted to understand if there was something going on. He said he was just stressed about work, and he'd been tired. He said he was sorry for being distant. He hugged me, and it felt warm and real, and I thought, okay. We're okay. This is just a rough patch. But I was wrong. Because what I didn't know at that point was that someone had already been planting seeds in my husband's mind, seeds that were being watered and carefully tended by the one person I never would have suspected. His mother, Margaret. Let me tell you about Margaret. Margaret was the kind of woman who had a gift for making you feel welcome and watched at exactly the same time. She was warm on the surface, always bringing food when she visited, always asking about your health, always smiling. But underneath that warmth, there was this intense controlling energy that you felt more than you could ever describe. She had opinions about everything: how Daniel should spend his time, how their money should be managed, where they should live, what kind of friends Daniel should have. When Daniel and I first got together, she was polite enough to me, but I always sensed that I was something she was tolerating rather than embracing. She called Daniel every single day. Not to chat casually, these were long calls, sometimes an hour, sometimes more, and afterward Daniel would sometimes be a little quieter, a little more withdrawn. I noticed the pattern early in our relationship, and I made a deliberate choice not to make it a battle. She was his mother. She loved him. That was her way of staying close to him. I decided I could live with that. What I didn't realize was that those daily phone calls had become something else entirely. And that what she said to him on those calls had been slowly, methodically changing the way he saw me. I found out later, much later, that the subtle shift in Daniel's behavior I first noticed had started right after a weekend visit from Margaret about 4 months prior. A visit where apparently she had shown him something on her phone. A photo, she said, something she had seen by accident, something that worried her about me. She didn't tell him what it was right away. She let him sit with the worry for a few days first, let it simmer. Then she called him and told him she needed to show him more. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that my husband was pulling further and further away from me, and I couldn't understand why. The second major sign came about 2 months in, and this one was harder to dismiss. Daniel and I had plans to go to his company's annual dinner together. I'd bought a new dress, I was looking forward to it, and then 2 days before the event, he told me he was going alone because it was a work thing, and it might be easier without me there. The way he said it, easier, without me there, landed like a slap I hadn't expected. I asked him what he meant by that. He backtracked, said he had just meant it would be long and boring for me. But the damage was done. I went to bed that night with that same anxious feeling, except now it had sharpened into something with actual edges. Something was wrong. Not work stress. Not tiredness. Something was actually wrong. The next morning I made a decision. Not to snoop. Not to check his phone. Not to do anything dramatic, but to pay very close attention. To stop making excuses for small things and start looking at the full picture. And the full picture, once I started really looking at it, was unsettling. He kept his phone face down now. He used to leave it sitting on the counter or the coffee table without a second thought. He'd never been a secretive person, but suddenly it was always turned over, or he'd carry it with him to rooms he'd never brought it to before. I told myself it meant nothing, maybe he'd just changed a habit, but I noticed. He started having full-length conversations in the car before he came into the house. I'd see his car pull into the driveway on the security camera, and sometimes 15-20 minutes would pass before he actually came inside. He was sitting out there talking on the phone. To who, about what? And then there was the night I reached for his hand while we were watching TV, something I'd done thousands of times, and I felt him stiffen, not pull away, just stiffen. Like my touch had made him uncomfortable. He recovered quickly and squeezed my hand, but I had felt it. And once you feel something like that, you can't unfeel it. I want to be honest with you about where my mind went during this period because I think it's important. My mind went to the obvious place. I started to wonder if Daniel was the one cheating. All the signs were there, the distance, the phone behavior, the guardedness, the subtle withdrawal. I agonized over it for weeks. I didn't want to believe it. This was the man I had built my entire life with. But the thought took root and I couldn't get rid of it. I never confronted him with that accusation. Something held me back. Some instinct that told me I didn't have the full picture yet, that jumping to conclusions would be a mistake. I'm glad now that I listened to that instinct. Because the truth, when it finally started to emerge, was nothing like what I had imagined. It was a Saturday afternoon about 3.5 months into this quiet nightmare. Daniel had gone to visit his mother for the day alone, which had become the norm, and I was at home trying to clean the house, trying to distract myself from the constant background noise of my anxiety. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It said, "You don't know me, but I think you need to know what's being said about you." I stared at that message for a long time before I responded. My first instinct was to ignore it. Unknown numbers with cryptic messages are usually nothing good, but something made me type back, "Who is this?" The response came quickly. "My name is Joel. I'm Daniel's cousin. I need to talk to you in person, please." Joel. I knew the name. I'd met him once at a family gathering about 2 years prior, a quiet guy, early 30s, on the edges of family events rather than the center of them. We'd barely exchanged 20 words. Why was he reaching out to me? I told him I wasn't sure I was comfortable meeting with someone I barely knew. He said he understood, but that what he needed to tell me couldn't be said over text. He said it was about Daniel, about what Daniel believed about me. and about what his mother had done. My blood went cold when I read that last part. We met that evening at a coffee shop across town. Joel was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner booth, looking like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time. He ordered a coffee, and then he looked at me across the table and said, "I'm sorry. I need to start with that. I'm genuinely sorry for my part in this, his part in this." What he told me over the next 90 minutes shattered everything I thought I understood about my marriage and the last year of my life. It had started, he said, about 14 months ago. His Aunt Daniel's mother, Margaret, had come to him with a proposition. She told him she was worried about Daniel, worried about the marriage, worried about me specifically. She said she had a feeling that I wasn't being faithful to Daniel, but she couldn't prove it. She wanted Joel to help her get the proof she needed. Joel said he had asked her what she meant, and she had been very clear she wanted him to approach me in public places, places she would specify in advance, and be photographed with me. She already had someone in mind to do the photographing, a friend of hers who did some freelance camera work. The goal was to capture footage and photos that looked intimate. Not overtly sexual, just close, suggestive. The kind of thing that to someone who already had suspicions planted in their head would look like exactly what it wasn't. He said he had refused at first, that he'd told her it was insane, that it wasn't right, that he wanted nothing to do with it. And she had pushed back. She'd reminded him of things she'd done for him, loans she'd given him during a difficult financial period, help she'd offered his parents. She made it very clear that she expected this as repayment, and that refusing would have consequences for his relationship with the family. So he had agreed. To his lasting shame, he had agreed. Over the course of the following 8 months, they had staged 6 separate encounters. Joel would show up at places where I happened to be: the gym I used on Saturday mornings, the coffee shop where I worked on freelance projects, the parking lot of the grocery store I always used. He'd approach me with some casual excuse, asking for directions, once pretending to recognize me from somewhere another time, and they'd talk briefly. Enough for the person with the camera to capture footage of us standing close him, leaning in the body language that, stripped of all context, looked like two people who knew each other much better than they did. I sat across from Joel and I listened to this, and I don't have words adequate to describe what I felt. It was like the floor beneath me had dissolved. Every single one of those interactions, I remembered them. The guy who asked me for directions and seemed nice enough. The man who said he thought he recognized me from a mutual friend's party. None of them had felt strange at the time, because none of them were strange at the time. They were manufactured normalcy. They were designed to feel like nothing, and someone had been filming all of them. Joel said that Margaret had been feeding Daniel pieces of it for months, not all at once, slowly, strategically. First, a question. "Have you noticed anything different about Carla lately? I worry sometimes." Then a photo. "I wasn't going to say anything, but I thought you should see this. I'm sure it's nothing." Then more footage, each piece timed carefully, each one designed to deepen a suspicion that had been planted in the most vulnerable soil imaginable, the mind of a man who loved his wife and was terrified of being betrayed. I thought about Daniel sitting alone with those images and videos. I thought about him trying to reconcile what he was seeing with the woman he knew. I thought about the months of distance, the stiffness, the late nights, the turned-over phone, all of it making terrible, awful sense now. And then a new thought broke through everything else. "How much has she shown him?" I asked. Joel said he didn't know for certain, but he believed she had shown Daniel most of it, and that she was planning to show him everything to push it to a final confrontation within the next few weeks. I drove home that night with shaking hands. If you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, something serious, something that threatens everything you care about, you know that the impulse is to immediately, frantically try to explain yourself, to talk fast and loud and hope that the truth is obvious enough. But I knew sitting in that car that I couldn't do that, because Daniel hadn't confronted me yet. If I came home and launched into an explanation of something he hadn't officially accused me of, I would look like someone who already knew they were guilty, like someone who was trying to get ahead of a story. I needed to be smart. I needed to be patient. And I needed to do something first. Before anything else, I needed evidence of my own. I met with Joel the following day, and I asked him a very direct question. Did he have any proof? Any proof at all that Margaret had orchestrated this texts, emails, voicemails, anything? He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said yes, he had saved the messages. All of them. Over a year's worth of WhatsApp conversations with Margaret where she had directed him, told him where to be, when to be there, how to approach me, what to wear, what to say. Conversations where she had talked openly about her goals. Where she had said things like, Daniel needs to see this as a pattern, and he needs to believe there's someone else before he'll ever agree to leave her. Conversations where she had talked about wanting Daniel to move back home, to be available to take care of her, to leave behind the life he had built with me. He sent me screenshots of all of it. I read through those messages for 4 hours. Every one of them. And with every message I read, I felt something shift inside me, away from the panic and the hurt and the desperate need to explain myself towards something colder and more certain, something that felt for the first time in months like control. I also did something else during those 4 hours. I went back through my own phone, my own calendar, my own records, and I cross-referenced every single one of the staged encounters Joel had described. I had photos taken at the gym on the Saturdays in question, gym check-ins tracked automatically in my fitness app. I had location data on my phone that showed exactly where I had been. I had credit card receipts from the coffee shop visits. I had security camera footage from our doorbell camera that showed the times I'd come and gone on the relevant days. I had a digital paper trail of my own life that corroborated exactly what Joel had told me and demolished any suggestion that I had been anywhere I shouldn't have been. I compiled everything into a folder on my laptop. And then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Daniel came home on a Tuesday evening and asked me to sit down in the living room. I knew from the look on his face, tense, pale, something like grief already living in his eyes, that this was it. This was the moment Margaret had been building toward. He sat across from me, he opened his laptop, and he said the words I had been dreading and preparing for at the same time. I need to show you something, and I need you to watch all of it before you say anything. He turned the screen toward me and pressed play. The footage was, I have to give Margaret credit for one thing and one thing only, it was good. If I had been watching it as an outsider without knowing any of the context, without having spoken to Joel, I think it would have been convincing. The clips had been cut together so that they showed me in a series of encounters with the same man, Joel, and they were arranged in a sequence that implied repetition, familiarity, intimacy. In one clip we were standing close together outside a coffee shop and he was leaning toward me. In another, I was laughing at something he said. In the last clip, the one Margaret had clearly saved for maximum impact, we were in a parking lot and he put his hand briefly on my arm. It took everything I had to watch that footage with a neutral expression, because my body wanted to react, to shake, to cry, to defend myself in real time. But I had made myself a promise in the days leading up to this moment I would watch everything first. I would not interrupt. I would not give her the explosive reaction she had been engineering toward. When the footage stopped, Daniel looked at me. His eyes were red, his jaw was set, and he said in a voice barely above a whisper, Carla. Who is that man? I said, I know him. I watched Daniel's face collapse when I said that. And I immediately said, I know exactly who he is. I know where every single one of those clips was taken, and I know the context of every single one of them. And I need you to look at what I've prepared before this conversation goes any further. I picked up my own laptop, I opened the folder, and I started from the beginning. I showed him Joel's messages first, the full chain from the very first request Margaret had made to the most recent. I let him read them in silence. I watched his face as he went from confusion to disbelief to something I had never seen on my husband's face before, a slow dawning horror that had nothing to do with me. He kept saying quietly, that's her number, that's her account, that's her. Then I showed him the location data, the timestamps, the gym check-ins, the receipts. I showed him that every single one of those clips had been filmed in public places, at times when my whereabouts were fully documented in situations I had no reason to remember because there had been nothing to remember. They were accidental feeling encounters with a stranger who turned out not to be a stranger at all. Then I told him who Joel was. I watched Daniel's face when he realized that the man his mother had used to stage a fake affair, the man she had filmed repeatedly with his wife in order to destroy his marriage, was his own cousin, his own family. Someone she had pressured and manipulated into participating in a scheme against the woman Daniel had chosen to spend his life with. He didn't speak for a very long time. If you enjoy real drama stories like this, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps the channel more than you know. When Daniel finally spoke, the first thing he said was, "I need to call Joel." I told him Joel was available. That Joel had already agreed to speak with him directly to confirm everything, to answer any questions Daniel had. That Joel had come to me first because he had been carrying the guilt of what he'd done for months, and he couldn't carry it anymore. Daniel called Joel. I sat in the kitchen and gave them privacy. The call lasted almost an hour. When Daniel came back into the living room, he looked like a man who had been taken apart and hadn't yet figured out how to reassemble himself. He sat down across from me and put his face in his hands. "I believed her," he said. "I actually believed her." What came out over the next several hours? Through tears, through silences, through questions I asked, and questions he asked, was the full timeline of what Margaret had done to Daniel's perception of me. She had started, he said, with small comments, subtle expressions of worry. "I just want you to be happy. I just want to make sure she's the right person for you." Over months, those comments had slowly shifted into concerns, things she had noticed, things she had seen, things she was almost certain about but didn't want to say. She had shown him the first photo when he was already in a vulnerable state, already primed by months of quiet doubt, seeding to receive it in the worst possible way. And he had let it change him. He had let it infect his trust in me. He had pulled away and watched me, and been cold and distant and suspicious for months, and he hadn't once come to me and said, "Your mother-in-law is showing me things that worry me. I need to talk to you." That was where it got complicated between us. Because the footage and the scheme were Margaret's doing completely without question, but Daniel had also made a choice. He had received that information, and he had chosen to believe it and change the way he treated me without ever giving me the chance to respond. That conversation, the one where we finally addressed what his silence had done to me, what months of being treated like a suspect by my own husband, had felt like that was the hardest conversation of our marriage. Not the revelation of what Margaret had done. Not the footage. The conversation about trust and about what it means when the person who is supposed to be your partner decides quietly and alone that you might be a liar. I'm not going to tell you it was easy. I'm not going to tell you we got through it in a night or a week. We went to couples counseling. We had difficult, painful conversations that sometimes ended with both of us going to bed in silence. There were moments when I didn't know if we were going to make it. But we did. We made it through. And then there was Margaret. Daniel called his mother 2 days after our living room conversation. He told her he knew everything. He told her he had seen the message chain with Joel. He told her that he and I had cross-referenced every clip with documented evidence of my whereabouts, and that none of it held up to scrutiny. She denied it. For a full 10 minutes on that phone call, she denied it. She said the messages had been taken out of context, that Joel had misrepresented things, that she had only been trying to protect her son. When that didn't work, she shifted tactics. She started to cry. She told Daniel how much she loved him. She told him she had only ever wanted what was best for him. She said she had been lonely since his father passed and she had been afraid of losing him. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout or curse or threaten. He said, and I was sitting next to him when he said it, and I will never forget this moment. "Mom, I know what you did. I know why you did it. And I need you to understand that what you tried to take from me was worth more than anything you could have offered me by bringing me back home. You didn't almost lose me to Carla. You nearly lost me because of what you did to her." She hung up. She called back 3 hours later, and this time she admitted it. Not fully, there was still hedging, still deflection, still, "I was afraid and I panicked, and you don't understand what it's like to be alone." But she admitted that she had arranged the footage. She admitted she had asked Joel to be part of it. She admitted that her goal had been to push the marriage to collapse. Daniel told her that until she was willing to take full responsibility and offer me a direct, unqualified apology, there would be no contact, not with him. Not with us. As of right now, that contact is still suspended. Joel, for his part, apologized to me again in person properly, fully, without excuses. I appreciate that. It doesn't undo what he did. But I believe his remorse is genuine. And I believe he made choices under real pressure from someone who knew how to apply it. I'm not saying that absolves him. I'm saying I've made my peace with it. What I've thought about most in the months since all of this came to light is the architecture of what Margaret built, the patience it required. The strategic patience of planting something slowly, tending it quietly, trusting that doubt compounds over time the way interest does. She didn't need Daniel to see one piece of overwhelming evidence. She needed him to receive a series of small, seemingly plausible pieces over a long enough period that his own mind did the rest of the work for her. That's what sophisticated manipulation looks like. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush. It waits. It cultivates. And the terrifying part is that it almost worked. If Joel hadn't reached out to me, if he had stayed quiet and let Margaret execute the final phase of her plan, if Daniel hadn't had the love for me that survived even those months of doubt, not because he didn't waver but because something in him kept choosing not to act on what he felt. He had been suspicious, yes. He had been distant and cold and hurtful in ways I had to work hard to forgive, but he had not left. He had not made an accusation. He had held himself at the edge for months without jumping. I think somewhere in him he was hoping to be wrong. And he was. He was wrong about me. And his mother was more wrong about him than she had ever imagined, because the love she tried to leverage as a weapon turned out to be the very thing that saved us. If you've been through something like this, if you've ever had someone close to you try to use the people you love as instruments of their own control, you know that the hardest part isn't the dramatic confrontation. It's not the big reveal or the evidence or the phone call where lies finally meet truth. The hardest part is the quiet daily work of rebuilding something that someone else tried to burn down. We're still doing that work. We're still in it. But we're doing it together, which is the only way it can be done. And Margaret lives alone in the house she wanted Daniel to return to. She calls sometimes. The calls go unanswered. I hope one day she understands what she lost. Not just her son's presence but his respect. Not just our marriage, but the chance to have been part of a family that genuinely wanted to include her, a family that had never been her enemy, no matter how many ways she tried to make us one. That understanding, if it ever comes, will be the most important thing she does in her life. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm holding on to what I have. And what I have is real. If this story connected with you, a like really does help this channel more than you might think, and if you want to hear more stories like this one, I'd love to have you here. Thank you for listening.